connected. We had major difficulties trying to get some connection. So I'm on my iPad and I don't have access to a lot of the other things that we normally have when these meetings are connected. So I'm going to be going a bit from memory today. We have with us two witnesses in the first hour. We have Mr. Giroux from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Office. And then in the second hour, we will have a representative from the Auditor General's Office, Ms. Karen Hogan. So we will have 1 hour set aside for both of these meetings. We're slightly behind schedule now, which is probably my fault because of the problems we've been having technologically. But we will go into questions and answers very quickly. I want to remind members that we have a schedule for next week. We're meeting Monday and Friday next week. On Monday, it is from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Friday, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The week following, that's the week of, I believe, June 8th, and then the week following that, the schedules change somewhat. Instead of Monday meetings, we go to Tuesday meetings from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on both Tuesdays, Eastern Standard Time, and the same time as normal on Fridays. Those meeting times are subject to change, however. Now, for our witnesses, I'm asking that all witnesses who are making presentations today try and keep your presentation succinct. I understand, Mr. Giroux, you have one that is no more than 5 minutes long. I appreciate that if you can keep to that timeline. I would also suggest, if possible, if you are making a statement in either French or English, you maintain that language for the entirety of your statement. Same thing when responding to questions. If a question is asked of you in one official language, please respond in the same official language. This will greatly assist our technical staff. If you try and alternate between French and English, sometimes it proves difficult for our technical staff to keep up. And with that, I will ask now Mr. Giroux and Mr. Green, if I can suggest this, if we can allow Mr. Giroux to make his short opening statement. Following that, if you want to bring anything forward on the point of order, please do so. But if we can please commence now with Mr. Giroux. And Mr. Giroux, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today, our first virtual appearance before this committee. We are pleased to be here today to discuss our recent COVID-19 economic and fiscal analysis. With me today, I have Mark Mahabir, Director of Policy Costing. Our pandemic-related work to date has included the publication of 3 scenario analysis reports on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and oil price shocks. Our scenario analysis reports are designed to help parliamentarians gauge the potential implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and oil price shocks on the Canadian economy and the government's finances. This analysis provides a plausible illustrative scenario, and it's not a forecast. The scenario analysis is updated regularly as more data and information become available. Our latest scenario analysis update report, which was published at the end of April, incorporates new federal measures announced up to and including April 24th. Our updated economic scenario assumes real GDP in Canada to decline by 12% in 2020, which would be the worst on record since the series started in 1961. Under this scenario, the budget deficit would increase to $252 billion in 2020-21. Relative to the size of the Canadian economy, the deficit would be 12.7% of GDP, and the federal debt to GDP ratio would rise to 48.4% of GDP in the current fiscal year. The latest fiscal results include $146 billion in federal budgetary measures that have been announced as of April 24th, based on Finance Canada and PBO cost estimates. These numbers do not take into consideration measures announced after April 24th. Their inclusion would increase the federal deficit by over $7 billion. My office has also produced cost estimates of several measures announced by the Government of Canada, notably the Canada Emergency Benefit, as well as the wage benefit. According to our analysis, the CERB, the cost related to CERB would amount to $35 billion, while the emergency wage benefit would cost $75 billion. Up to now, measures announced by the government are temporary in nature. As soon as these measures will expire and the economy will start to grow again, the federal debt to GDP ratio should start to grow at a much lower level and even stabilize. However, should the measures be permanent or some of them be extended, the debt to GDP ratio could keep on rising. Mark and I will be happy to answer your questions on COVID-19 related measures or any work of my office. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I believe the may have lost the chair's feed. Monsieur Drouin.
Yes, thank you.
Pourriez-vous présider la réunion?
Yes, I can participate.
In English. Yep. Thank you for the testimony. I will now go to for 6 minutes to the Conservatives.
Mr. McCauley. Mr. McCauley, I believe you're muted.
Mr. Giroux, welcome back. Good to see you. Mark, good to have you with us. Mr. Giroux, the most recent April StatsCan labor force showed there was 3 million jobs lost since February. And when you add in people absent from work or had their hours cut back, it comes up to about 5.5 million. We have almost 8 million people on the CERB. How do you explain the gap?
Well, Mr. McCauley, it's not that easy to explain the gap for now because data is still coming in, and people were strongly encouraged to apply for the CERB. So we know, for example, that StatsCan is incurring difficulties that were not anticipated before due to the unusual circumstances. They're having difficulties collecting data in the usual manner. There's also the fact that many people who were not considered employed or self-employed may still be eligible for the CERB. But it goes without saying that there has been very little oversight or verification mechanisms included in the design of the CERB because the goal of the government was to send money to individuals as quickly as possible. So it is quite possible that there are people who apply who would not otherwise be eligible. And hopefully verifications after the fact will catch some of these people who applied and might not have been eligible. But it's very difficult to explain solely through fraud and abuse. And the numbers in the LFS labor force survey suggest that a lower number of individuals might have been eligible for the CERB than what is suggested by StatsCan.
Okay. My connection seems to be pretty spotty. I'm not sure if you can still hear me. The CERB was supposed to be ballpark about 30 billion. We're already up to about 40 billion in benefits and about in month 2. Do you get a sense of what the CERB cost will be at the end if it's not extended? How much higher is it from your estimate?
We have not revised our estimate recently, so we have revised our estimate after the emergency wage benefit was announced. But since we haven't updated our estimate since, so with the coming into force of the wage benefit, we were expecting a slightly lower take-up of CERB, which has not happened. The numbers keep rising for CERB. So we will
Let
have
me-
to update.
Mr. Giroux.
Sorry.
Let me interrupt you and just continue on.
Mr. Mr. McCauley, if I can just interject for a moment, and I apologize again, I was somehow lost a connection just before you started speaking. We'll be going with 5-minute rounds for the first round, then 4 minutes, then 2 minutes. So, Mr. McCauley, I will add some time to you for this interjection, but please go ahead.
Right. Thanks. Mr. Giroux, the other flip side is the wage subsidy. We've had nowhere near the uptake that's been expected. Originally 76 billion set aside, only 7 has been used. Why do you think the uptake has been so low? Did the wage subsidy come out far too late after the layoff decisions happened? Or is it what I'm anecdotally hearing, which is the wage subsidy is just being used for the surviving employees, so to speak, but not being used to actually hire people back?
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, we don't know yet why the uptake in the wage subsidy is so much lower than the government and ourselves had estimated.
Okay.
It could well be that it's more beneficial for some businesses, to just lay off their workers and benefit from the wage subsidy until they can resume their operations to full capacity. But we don't know that yet for sure.
So a possible rethink of the eligibility might be a good idea. I want to pop over quickly to the strong, secure, and engaged. We had asked for a report on the defense spending, how much is lapsing, what's on schedule, and what's behind. You had told us originally end of May. Where is the report? It is the end of May now.
So we asked the department for updated information, and we did not get it. So we were, as you mentioned, hoping to release a report by the end of May, but we haven't received the information we were hoping to get. So we have to postpone that.
From D&D?
Yes.
They didn't give it to you? Why?
We don't know yet.
That's disgraceful. This is $500 billion of spending. Are they refusing to give it to you? Are they ignoring it? What are they doing?
Apparently, the current situation makes it very difficult for departmental officials to provide us with the information.
But this was only a couple months. Have they been ignoring it for longer than the current situation?
We were supposed to get the information while on time to provide parliamentarians with an update on strong, secure, and engaged. May was the target date for us, but we didn't get the information on time. So
when are you going to get the information from DND?
We were told it will be a couple of weeks, delayed by a couple of weeks, but we have not received it yet.
Would you be able to report back to us mid-June if they've updated, if they've given you that information? That's disgraceful. The DND for $500 billion is so important. It's not providing. This is just like asking for the bid information on the ships where they delayed for years. Let me ask you just one last question. Is all this emergency spending, is it going to put into jeopardy strong security engaged spending plans?
Sorry, Mr. McCauley, you cut off in the last sentence.
All of the emergency spending going on right now, will that put into jeopardy the strong secured and engaged spending plans?
That's a question that the government would be in a good position to answer. For example, if in the need to return to more sustainable spending, if the government decides to cut some aspects of government operations and it targets defense spending, then it could put in jeopardy strong, secure, and engaged spending, or D&D spending more generally. However, if it decides to reduce other areas of government spending, it could leave D&D spending untouched. But these are all policy choices that the government will have to make when it decides the way it wants to return to more sustainable levels of deficit or even a balanced budget.
Yeah, as if. I assume that's my time, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to have to ask Paul, are we expired?
Yes, time has expired now. The next person will be Mr.
All right.
Kuzmierczak.
Because
Thank you.
Mircek, you have five minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, for your report that you provided us with detailed economic picture during this COVID period compared to some of the forecasts, for example, from previous years. I wanted to get a sense of our economic fiscal position relative to other countries which are going through a similar situation. I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to that a little bit, and I'll cue that up by just saying I read a report, for example, where the measures, the total value of the measures that were put forward, for example, in the United States, amounted to about 6% of their GDP. We know in France, for example, the measures they put forward amounted to about 1% of GDP. Can you sort of give us paint a picture, put the measures that were put in place, the $250 billion, what percentage of our GDP does that actually represent?
Sure. So the measures put in place by the government so far, although I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, it depends also if you include loans and loan guarantees or just fiscal spending. But a deficit of 12% of GDP is slightly higher than several of our international peer countries with which we usually compare ourselves. That being said, we haven't done a thorough analysis of what's being done abroad because we have focused on the Canadian situation. But Japan, for example, has done or has recently announced efforts that are significant in relation to the size of their economy. As you mentioned, some European countries are doing efforts that are slightly lower than what we have currently announced in Canada, that have been announced, I should say, while other countries are doing slightly more. For example, you mentioned France, but while France is doing probably less as a proportion of the economy than Canada, the European Union is also pooling its resources to help affected countries. So it makes international comparisons a bit more difficult. And that's why I wouldn't venture into too much details as to how we compare internationally, because my office has not done that work, at least not to the extent that I would feel comfortable talking about the various situation of each country compared to Canada.
Okay, no, I understand completely. Can you sort of describe in general terms, even with this unprecedented spending that we've seen here, can you sort of describe the fiscal position of Canada at this point?
Sure. So the fiscal position of Canada at this point, or I should say before the pandemic started, was relatively sound in the sense that our debt to GDP ratio was relatively low compared to other countries at about 30%, which allowed the government to introduce fiscal measures as well as guarantee loans as it has. And even with the deficit that we mentioned in our scenario note, the deficit at $250, $260 billion should result in a debt to GDP ratio of about 48%. That's at the federal level, which is still some way to go before it reaches the record level it reached in 1995-96, which was 66.6% of GDP. So there is still some flexibility at the federal level to borrow or spend a bit more. The difficult situation there would be to keep that temporary, because if these measures are extended or made permanent, then we would be in a situation where we'd have deficits year after year at a very significant level. And in such a scenario, we could easily reach 66% of GDP, which was the record level reached in the 1990s. So while we have still some fiscal room for maneuver, we don't have that room for maneuver at the current levels for several years.
Okay, great. And one other question. A lot of the report focused on, for example, public debt, but we also know we have to take into consideration household debt as well, too, when we're devising policies. And I'm just curious, knowing that the $250 billion, a big chunk of it was focused on helping families pay their bills and pay down some of their debts as well too. How important was the federal stimulus in light of the household debt that we have in Canada to be able to help and support families?
Well, Mr. Giroux, unfortunately, we're out of time. I would ask, though, if you could provide a written response to Mr. Commusical to our clerk. Now we'll go to our next intervener, Madame Vignola. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Hello, Mr. Giroux. Thank you for being there with us. I'm Ms. Questions. I have so many questions to ask. Just to be sure about your mandate, before a new measure being implemented, is your office being consulted before anything is implemented to have sure that we evaluate the impacts, the potential impacts of this measure? It's a very short answer, no. Wouldn't it be a good idea to consult you beforehand? It would be a good idea in as far as the government would want to have opinions from an independent parliamentary officer, yes, but also it would mean that they would have to not take into consideration the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's recommendations. And it's not part of my mandate either. My mandate would have to be modified to allow me to do that. Thank you. You were talking about measures earlier, some measures if they become permanent, like you were saying. What measures could become permanent, in your opinion? Well, it depends, obviously, on the government's wishes or intents. But one of the measures that could become permanent because of how attractive it is for Canadians, it's CERB. It's much simpler than EI. It's easier to understand. The amount is clear, same every week, whatever level employees were at, or even self-employed people are covered. So the measure could be part of a lot of pressure to be made permanent, but it's not an opinion that I'm expressing on the fact that it should or should not be permanent. It's a question of public policy that is to be decided by Parliament and parliamentarians. Thank you. If the government decided to render it permanent for XYZ reasons, what would be the benefits and the inconvenience, the downfalls of this measure on the economy? Well, this measure is quite simple to administer, to manage, but since the benefits are not linked directly to the earned income, it could be much more attractive for some individuals to use CERB as long as possible or as often as possible rather than trying to find work. For example, people who are working at minimum wage with less than 35 or 40 hours could find themselves in a situation where CERB is more advantageous than working. So it's the main disadvantage. So there should be, if CERB becomes permanent, there should be an incentive to work. Like CERB should be modified according to your income. If you have $1,000, you get CERB, but more than $1,000, for each extra dollar, there's a cut in percentage of CERB. Would that incite people to go back to work? Yes, there's various possibilities, various designs that could improve the work incentives or reduce the disincentives to work. Thank you. Excellent. Currently, do you think that public investments are stimulating the market and the economy? I don't see the current measures are stimulating the economy.
Brief answer, sir.
Oui, je vais y aller assez brièvement.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I see those measures as measures for survival. They're supporting businesses during the crisis. They're not stimulating economic activity because governments have closed whole sections of the economy. So that's for survival, not for stimulation.
Mr. Green, we have you for 5 minutes. And as I was attempting to mention at the outset, now that you've been identified, if you do have a motion you wish to present, now would be the time. But
actually, just respect. Thank you, Mr. Chair, but respecting the importance of having the parliamentary budget officer here, particularly at this COVID time, I'm going to go ahead and reserve that privilege for the second half out of respect to my committee members. Mr. Giroux, we know that once the financial supports and the emergency measures related to COVID-19 come to an end, there will be a pressure on the government to bring the budget into balance and to reduce the national debt. This is often code for severe austerity measures because the financial situation is often seen as a spending problem rather than a revenue problem. In June 2019, the Parliamentary Budget Officer issued a report, which were the preliminary findings on international taxation, which, if I understand correctly, identified that Canada is losing $25 billion or more a year in tax revenues from multinational corporations avoiding taxes through tax havens. Can you comment on the importance of our financial health to take action on the use of tax havens?
Certainly, thank you for the question. So it's clear that with temporary measures and an economy that's grinding to a screeching halt, spending has gone up, revenues have gone down, which leads to what we expect to be an unprecedented deficit. However, as the economy recovers and the measures that have been implemented as temporary are allowed to expire, we expect that the deficit, all other things being equal, the deficit should return to a much lower level, so a much smaller deficit. But as we've seen in the past, there's always a deficit that subsides. There's never a return naturally to deficit. So there's going to be a need for government action if the government was to desire a return to balanced budgets. So in that vein, tackling international tax evasion could be a very useful tool to return to balanced budgets or to improve the federal fiscal balance. The big challenge with international tax evasion, however, is the access to information regarding the income that's hidden and the assets that are held offshore. So international cooperation is essential, as well as ensuring that the tax authorities in Canada have the tools they need to tackle that tax evasion. Several parties submitted proposals to my office during the election, and a couple of these measures could could be implemented to at least eat into that chunk of money that evades tax authorities.
Well, I'd like to start with that, actually. It's a perfect segue. Last September, your office issued a report on the impact of implementing a 1% tax on those with a net worth of more than $20 million, and it determined that it could result in close to $70 billion in additional revenue. Based on my simple math, the implementation of just these two policy changes, the capturing and the closing of tax loopholes with this wealth tax, could result in an additional $320 billion in revenue for the federal government over 10 years. What impact could this increase in revenue have on the federal government's fiscal position?
Well, if we were talking about revenue increases of such a magnitude, it would have a significant positive impact on the federal balance over a 10-year period. However, if these measures were to be put in place, they would have to be accompanied by very strict enforcement measures, because we all know that people with that amount of wealth also have access to avoidance measures that are perfectly legal, maybe not legitimate, but legal. And they also have access to very sophisticated tax arrangements and corporate structures that allow them to minimize the impact of these taxes. So what we have said back then when we released our cost estimate is that the estimates were had a high level of uncertainty given the potential behavioral impact of those with such high net worth.
I just want to, say thank you for that observation that, of course, what is legal is not always what is moral or legitimate. And it would be great for us to be able to put into place legislation that was both legitimate and moral, hence legal. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll hold for my second round should it come up for my next set of questions.
Thank you very much. We will now go to our 4-minute round of questioning, starting with Mr. McCauley for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Giroux, I understand the government's created a brand new pay code, code 699, to track COVID sick days for public service employees. I'm wondering if you have any details, any numbers right now. What are the costs being incurred and how that compares to what's going on in the private sector?
That's an interesting question, but that's a question for which I don't have an interesting answer, sadly, because we haven't started looking at that. We know anecdotally that thousands of individuals, public servants, have used that special code, which is known in some departments by the code 699, paid leave for other reasons. We did not send an information request to departments as to the number of people who are using that benefit.
But that maybe get back to us end of July, end of June.
we can certainly look at the feasibility of getting that type of information.
Great. Now let me ask you, with the change with Parliament basically being suspended to September, what are the consequences of simply having the supplementary estimates deemed reported without any committee review? And what would you recommend to be done to offset basically the oversight of the supplementary spending?
I assume you're talking about the upcoming supplementary estimates A, which will have a maximum of 4 hours of scrutiny at committee. And these supplementary estimates are
not in actual committees.
Indeed. So these estimates are very likely to include dozens of billions of dollars in new spending, if not over $100 billion in new spending. And to have only a committee of the whole look at that for a maximum of 4 hours, to me, it's unfortunate, to say the least, because there will be very little opportunity for parliamentarians to look at these important amounts of spending and to hold the government to account on what amounts to unprecedented spending. So in my opinion, it would have been better to allow for more scrutiny of what is unprecedented spending, because during 4 hours, it comes up as very expensive 4 hours potentially for Canadian taxpayers. The amount of scrutiny for this unprecedented spending will also be unprecedented, but for the wrong reasons.
So you're suggesting perhaps the revolutionary idea of parliamentarians doing what Parliament was created for. Wow. Shocking.
I wouldn't call that revolutionary, but
it was as radical as that. Let me ask you, the fiscal stabilization program, how's that going to work post-COVID, and what can be done around that?
You're referring to fiscal stabilization that provides funding to provinces that experience a drop in their revenues, on-source revenues. So we are looking at that. We're looking at the impact of having increased fiscal stabilization program, the per capita amounts. So you can expect a report from us between now and probably the next 4 or 5 months.
Great, thanks. Any more time, Mr. Chair?
About 30 seconds only, Mr. McCauley.
Any comments about the, we talked about the debt to GDP and the change from 96, but of course that's very different. The provinces aren't in bad shape. Do you have any thoughts on that, or the municipalities, how we're going to deal with that?
It will be a difficult situation, fiscally speaking, for many provinces and territories.
Very briefly, please, sir, very briefly.
Okay, so I can provide a written answer to that question, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Giroux and Mr. Mahabir, for joining our committee today. I just want to pick up on a question that one of my fellow committee members mentioned earlier, and that was the distinction between the CERB numbers and the employment figures. And I'm wondering, given that the qualification for CERB has been changed, so now that you can earn up to $1,000 and still qualify for the CERB, if that might make up for some of the distinction there.
I'll ask Mark if he can answer your question.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that could make up some of the difference. Also, as well, the numbers reported by CRA are the gross amounts. So for some individuals, there will be overpayments. So the amount that is reported and the number that is reported could reflect people who will have to pay back a certain amount in the future.
Great, thank you. And has the PBO costed out how much it would cost to extend CERB for a full year, or otherwise how much it would cost to implement a universal basic income?
So we have not costed an extension of CERB. We have done work in the past. Before my appointment, the office did a cost estimate of implementing a universal basic income. We've also been asked by two parliamentarians to update these costs, and we will be providing an updated cost estimate to the 2018 cost estimate of a UBI by the end of June. So in the next 4.5 weeks, we should be able to release a revised cost estimate of implementing universal basic income.
Thank you. And given with the amount of spending to date, and you mentioned 252 billion or something in that range, how is the government going to be able to finance these benefits, and what interest rates are government bills and bonds currently sold at?
So the government currently being in a deficit position, it will have to borrow to finance additional benefits should it wish to extend benefits. And current borrowing rates are around 1%, 1.2%, depending on the maturities that you're looking at. Short term, slightly lower, long term, slightly higher, but the interest rates are at very, very low compared to historical rates.
So what, in that sense, what would be the annual cost of servicing a debt of that magnitude?
Servicing the debt, we estimate to be currently $23.3 billion of a debt that will be upwards of $950 billion. So relatively low compared to historical levels, but it's due to the very low interest rates.
Thank you. And given the unique nature of the economic impact of the pandemic, may require new ways of stimulating the economy, what fiscal measures would you suggest that the federal government consider?
That's a very good question, but a question best answered by ministers. Fiscal measures could include spending on various programs as well as tax measures. There's a long list of potential measures, and I'm sure ministers and other stakeholders will have a lot of good ideas.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. McCauley once again for 4 minutes, please. Mr. McCauley?
Mr. McCauley.
Conservative MPs have asked the PBO to update the report on infrastructure. The previous report on infrastructure that you showed was 40% of the funds lapsed unused, and that the infrastructure plan did not actually exist as a plan. Now, the Minister of Infrastructure said they've created or supported 53,000 projects with the funds so far. So I assume the department can give you the list of these 53,000 projects. Now, do you have that list?
That's a very reasonable assumption once you hear that there is such a list. We've asked the department and we have been able to find information for 33,000 of these projects. So we have not been able to see a list that includes all these 52 or 53,000 projects, only 33,000 of these projects.
Where are the other 20,000 projects then?
If I knew, sir, I would have a different answer to that question. I don't know, sadly.
Oh, it would be, you mentioned it'd be a reasonable question, but obviously it's not reasonable with the ministry. Have you received all the information you've asked for?
With respect to infrastructure,
Yes.
except for the missing pieces, which are an important aspect, yes. So when we ask for information,
do you think those other 20,000 projects exist?
I believe they do exist, but it's
In the
hard.
or in
It's
the
hard
mind?
to be convinced. So I have faith they do exist, but I don't have proof that they exist.
The billions being spent by this government or by the department, what percentage of that money can be attributed to these 33,000 specific projects?
I don't have that information off the top of my head, unfortunately.
What kind of bump are we getting for GDP growth from this spending? And is it a best value for stimulus?
I'd have to go back to previous reports. I've been focusing mostly on COVID-19 related measures, but I remember that the amounts were relatively small compared to the overall spending amounts in terms of the economic impact.
Right. And my understanding, for every dollar being put out, the provinces or municipalities are pulling back spending. So my understanding, again, anecdotally, is that the economy is not seeing a push or a bump from these billions of spending.
That's true. As one of our findings, we discovered that provinces are displacing some of their spending that would otherwise have taken place as a result of federal infrastructure spending. So they're spending on projects to ensure that there's cost matching, but they're reducing other types of projects, or in summary, federal spending ends up displacing a portion of provincial spending that would have taken place anyways.
Is it just you're having the same problems as you're having with D&D, that they're just refusing to release the information? Like 20,000 projects, that's 38% maybe of total projects. How do you lose 38% of projects?
Well, we didn't find that there's an unwillingness to provide us with the information. It seems to not exist in one single repository. So we ask Infrastructure Canada for a list of projects, and we don't get a list that covers the entirety of all the projects. We have to ask other departments, and we still don't have a complete list.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Mr. Jahari for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank to Mr. Giroux for providing the testimony. You indicated that based on your analysis, we are going from 30% to about 48% debt to GDP ratio. And we are going to add, and that was as of, I believe, April 24th. And you also mentioned that there's another 7 billion after that needs to be added to the debt. And assuming the same rate GDP growth, we would be around what you mentioned is higher, but you didn't specifically said what would that position us. But you also mentioned that it's about 66% if we go back, compared it to the 66% going back to 1995. As of today, where would our GDP, the debt to GDP, be with the addition of the $7 billion?
So doing quick math in my head, which is always risky, we would be close to 49% of GDP, debt to GDP ratio, if we also included the $7.6 billion that were announced since April 24th.
Okay, so applying the same quick math, and if we say that we will, as these emergency supports come to an end, we'll stop that. Where do you think we will end? We'll end with the GDP ratio, assuming all of these will finish at the time that we've announced for it to finish.
Well, that's highly hypothetical, but assuming that the programs that are temporary do remain temporary and sunset, and a slow recovery as we expect, it would not be unthinkable to have 55% debt to GDP ratio by the end of next fiscal year. And that's assuming that the economic recovery is at a reasonable pace.
Thank you. Where would that put us vis-a-vis the debt? Like, what would you anticipate the debt grow to? So we know 255, another 7.5. Where would our debt balloon to?
It would certainly be above $1 trillion, so 1,000 billions. The exact level is highly hypothetical, and that's why we have not published a scenario analysis beyond the current fiscal year, because it's highly uncertain.
Fair enough. So let's assume, based on all of these, we're in the $1 trillion debt. What would that do to the cost of servicing that debt? Currently, I believe we're in the $30 billion servicing the debt. What would that do to the servicing of the debt? How much of our GDP, or how much of the revenue that we get from the government, as a government, would go into servicing the debt?
So we expect the cost of servicing the federal debt to amount to about 8%, 8.2% of federal revenues. That's significantly lower than the peak reached in the mid-1990s, where it was 35, 36%, if not slightly higher. So still relatively low compared to the peak that was reached 25 years ago, but that's due to the very low level of interest rates. And interest rates being so low means that they can either stay very low or can start to increase progressively over time. So even though it's a very small proportion of federal revenues, that share is likely to increase over the next several years.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll now go to our 2-minute intervention, starting with Monsieur Bassirou Duval for 2 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. In fact, my question for you, for the parliamentary budget officer, usually I don't have time to put 2 questions, so I'll ask him right now. And Mr. Parliamentary Budget Officer, you can answer with the time remaining. My first question, indeed, is to try to know, Mrs. Vignola has asked you a question earlier, where we did realize that the emergency benefit, the CERB for student or workers, is a disincentive to go back to work. There is no a progressive reduction of the emergency benefit when people go back to work. What is the loss for the government? We're talking here about tax revenues. This Canadian emergency response benefit is a disincentive to go to work. Now, concerning the commercial rental support, there are very few businesses who are using it. We think that this measure is inefficient. Are you of the same opinion? I will briefly respond to both your questions. The first one is, we didn't look at the budgetary or fiscal impact of the Canadian emergency benefit. We didn't look of this disincentive to go back to work and what is happening given that. For the second question, can you remind me the second question, please? It's concerning the rent assistance.
But if you do have an answer for that second question, when you recall it, please submit the answer in writing to our clerk as soon as you can. We'll now go to our final 2-minute intervention. Mr. Green.
On May 4th, 2020, in response to a question from a member, officials from the Department of Finance told the committee that infrastructure is one of the tried and tested stimulus levers. At an appropriate time, we would be turning our minds to such things that will have worked in the past to stimulate the economy. But we really still need to see why through the current stabilization and restart activities. And then on the 12th of May, the PBO told the same committee that the government should seriously consider productivity enhancing stimulus measures as opposed to pure spending, which doesn't lead to greater well-being and greater wealth generating capacity. To what extent should the federal government use infrastructure spending stimulus, and when should these fiscal measures and stimulus spending be implemented?
So since saying that on May 12th, I've looked at the numbers a bit more, and it seems that construction and infrastructure spending in general was obviously not the most affected sector of the economy. So while it would be helpful to stimulate the economy, I'm not convinced that it would be the best way to stimulate the economy, because it's not the sector that was affected the most. So in my humble opinion as a taxpayer, stimulating sectors that have been the most deeply affected by the COVID-19 might be a better way to stimulate the economy, and so infrastructure and construction were not the most affected sectors.
So with significant impacts to hospitality and service sectors that generally pay lower wages, is this affecting women more than men?
That's also something that my 21-year-old daughter has clearly pointed out to me, that women have been disproportionately affected by this recession, this COVID-19, and efforts should keep that in mind. Efforts at a recovery should clearly keep that in mind.
And recognizing that, does that also extend to racialized communities?
That's also a good point, but not something I've looked into personally.
Thank you for the answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Monsieur Giroux, thank you so much for being with us today. As always, your answers have been insightful and informative. Colleagues, I will excuse Mr. Giroux. At this point in time, we will suspend for just a couple of moments while we prepare for our next round of witnesses. So we are suspended.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to...
Madame Hogan, I understand you've got a 5-minute or less opening statement, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting us to discuss the role of the Auditor General in examining the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. With me today is Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General and Interim Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. As background, the Office of the Auditor General of Canada has received 3 requests for audits from the House of Commons since Parliament resumed in January. We have informed the Speaker of the House that we will do these 3 audits. First, on January 29th, the House of Commons adopted a motion calling on our office to conduct an audit of the government's Investing in Canada plan and to report our findings no later than 1 year following the adoption of the motion. Then, on March 13th, An order made by the House of Commons called on our office to conduct an audit of special warrants issued under the Financial Administration Act and to report our findings no later than June 1st, 2021. We understand that no special warrants have been issued to date. Lastly, on April 11th, the House of Commons adopted a motion requesting that we conduct an audit of the COVID-19 emergency response taken by the government and to report our findings no later than June 1st, 2021. That order also called on the government to take the measures that are necessary to ensure that our office has sufficient resources to conduct the work that we have been asked to do by the House of Commons. We have been monitoring the initiatives that the government has been introducing to respond to the pandemic, including the spending related to protecting health and safety, support to individuals and businesses, and other liquidity support and capital relief. We also believe that it's important to consider elements of emergency preparedness and early response actions. This may allow us to identify good practices and areas for improvement in case there is a future wave of this pandemic or to be ready for a future pandemic that may arise. We welcome any input that this committee may have on areas that we could examine as part of our COVID-19 audit work. Le 28 avril dernier, nous avons fait savoir au président.
On April 28th, we told the Speaker of the House that we are prioritizing COVID-19 audit work and the audit of the Investing in Canada plan. Given the nature and extent of the work that we believe is required to conduct these audits, and in light of our limited resources, we had to revisit the timing for completing and reporting on the other performance audit work that we had planned. On that basis, we informed the Speaker of the House that we have had to delay all other performance audit work that is not related to the motions adopted by the House of Commons. Of course, decisions to postpone planned audit work are difficult to make because the topics we select for our performance audits are important to parliamentarians and Canadians. However, our limited resources have prevented us from conducting some of that important work. Now that we need to postpone this work further, we don't know when we will be able to get to it. As a final point, I wish to emphasize that we are fully aware that many departments and agencies are on the front line, and they are devoting tremendous amounts of time and resources to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are mindful of their operational realities. We have been coordinating with senior public servants to minimize the risk that our audit work could divert their attention away from the support and services that they need to provide to Canadians. In these challenging times, I want to acknowledge the commitment and engagement of Canadians as they deal with this pandemic, including members of the Federal Public Service and our offices, staff. We are ready to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, since we've gained a little time, we'll go back to our original 6-minute round of questions, starting with Mrs. Block.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to welcome our witnesses who have joined us today. I want to start by congratulating you, Ms. Hogan, on your appointment to the position of Auditor General of Canada. It's very important work that you and your office do, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Many of my questions will be built off of the testimony that you provided in the exchange you had with my colleague, Mr. Pat Kelly, at the Public Accounts Committee recently. And I will just turn to one of the quotes from an answer that you gave, and you stated, "We will do our best, and I commit to getting information to Parliament as quickly as we can so we can begin to see if there were any lessons learned or changes we can make to better prepare ourselves and the government should we have to go through this again." And I know you stated that in your opening remarks today. So my first observation and question would be this. To mitigate the effectiveness of the opposition, the Liberal government, with the help of the NDP, have effectively shut down Parliament until the fall. And it appears to me that the Liberal government is also trying to mitigate the effectiveness of the Auditor General's office by limiting your office's funding. Regarding the funding shortfall for your office, my colleague, Mr. Kelly, noted that it is normal for the office to produce 8 or 9 reports, not the 4 which you currently have ready to table. What topics were not audited this past winter or spring? And maybe more specifically, what were the top 4 or 5 areas that were left unaudited due to your office's lack of funding?
So thank you very much for the question. And unfortunately, given I'm still completing the procedural steps to finalize my nomination and getting up to speed on all of our audit work, I don't have the specifics of what we would have not done last year. Perhaps my colleague Andrew would know that, but I do know that we have, as I mentioned, 4 reports ready to go, 3 under the banner of the Auditor General and 1 under the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development. So maybe I'll see if Andrew knows what we may have canceled in that past year.
Sure.
Okay, I think I'm on now, on English. Okay, I see by your smile. Definitely the 2 most significant audits that we had on track to audit in the past year that had to be delayed were an audit of cybersecurity and an audit of protecting Canada's North. We mentioned that both of those audits to the Public Accounts Committee last June when we were appearing before that committee to discuss our funding.
Wow, thank you for that answer. Would have been a very timely audit when you consider where we are today and our dependence on the internet and doing work virtually. In the exchange with Mr. Kelly,
Mrs. Block, if I can just for briefly, would you? This is for the benefit of our technicians. Could you move your microphone down just about an inch, not a little too much? Move back up a little. There, that should be good. You were kind of coming across with a little fuzzy sound for our technicians. Please go ahead. You haven't been docked any time.
Okay, thank you very much. Is this better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, I just observed that would have been a very timely audit given where we are today and how we're conducting our business, and even the fact that we met with the witnesses we met on Friday. Ms. Hogan, in the exchange with Mr. Kelly, you mentioned that the Auditor General's office would soon be turning its attention to 2 very important matters, which is auditing investing in Canada and the government's COVID-19 spending. When is the last time an audit of Investing Canada was conducted?
I believe the plan Investing in Canada is a rather new plan, and so this would likely be our first time. I know that many of our audits in the past have focused on significant spending, and typically those are large projects that we would have turned our attention to because of the importance that they would have to Canadians and to services that are provided to them. Perhaps Mr. Hayes again would have some history on all of that. You can imagine that the breadth of our work is tremendous, and I don't know a very specific one in the recent past. So Andrew, do you have something that perhaps you can add that's a little more informative than my response?
Mr. Hayes, if you could bring your microphone up to about 2 inches away from your mouth.
There we go. Yeah, I forgot to do that before. Thank you. In terms of infrastructure, we did do an audit of sustainable infrastructure in the community context in, I believe it was 2017. We've also, of course, done infrastructure audits over the years. Most significant, I would say that the economic action plan work that we did in 2010, 2011 would have been our most significant infrastructure work.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that. And I want to turn now to the other important matter, which is COVID-19 spending. Regarding an audit of the government's response to COVID-19, will the government's management of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile be included in your planned audit?
And a very brief answer, if possible.
I will. I'll keep it short. Thank you. So we're in the process, as I mentioned at a previous hearing, that our steering committee is looking at exactly where we might go and what we might look at. And so obviously that protecting health and safety is a key matter that we will be looking at. And so it's a little early to decide on the exact specific areas, but looking at preparedness and actions during the pandemic, as well as lessons learned, is definitely an area that we're focusing in on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will now go to Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I also want to congratulate our new Auditor General, Madam Hogan. Congratulations for your nomination. In your opening statement, you said that, yes, you talked about an audit on the measures taken by the government for COVID-19. Will COVID-19 impact your office and its work? Will you be able, because normally you're sending audits to offices to go ahead and audit on site. How will this change? How will audits change? Well, thank you for your congratulations. Yes, the pandemic has an impact on our employees. Currently, everybody's working off-site, and like many departments, we are having some concerns and difficulties in getting information. It's a change in how we do everything. We're doing everything virtually with technology. So I anticipate delays, obviously, for us and also on the other departments' side too, because everybody's adapting. Yes, obviously. And when you audit, you will be looking at program delivery, which were announced. How to establish what are the criteria? Did Department XYZ did its work properly? Did they reach their goals? And we hear on the news that this CERB, for provincial reasons, there's people who applied but who have a clawback by the province. How will you establish criteria to make sure that audits and programs really reached the goals that they had set for themselves? Well, for each audit, criteria are very important. They establish the agreement between us and the entities that are being audited to ensure that we are in agreement on what criteria will be used for account rendering. We use various things, amounts invested, impact on Canadians. We've also developed discussions with deputy ministers to know what their concerns are and what the objectives are for all the individual measures. So criteria are important, but also we have to know what the objective was to make sure that we evaluate both things. Also, you talked about employees. Do you expect to make a request to the government that to have more people? Will you need more auditors in your office to complete the audits on COVID-19? Well, as I believe you're all aware of, we've asked for more permanent funding for our office, it's obvious. But currently, we're trying to really think together and trying to be creative. Sometimes it's contract work, sometimes it's changing our plans, adapting. We're doing our best to ensure that we have all the auditors that we need to do the work we need to do. But like I said in my opening comments, decisions to cancel or defer audits are not very easy, but currently it's the most efficient solution for now. And if I understand correctly, Madam Hogan, fiscal year 2018-19 had 38 new employees working at the Auditor General's office. Maybe Mr. Hayes is better positioned to answer, but what do these 38 new employees do? I'll start, and I'll give the floor to Andrew later if he wants to add anything. These new employees are everywhere in the office. Some of them are in IT, some are auditors. 38 seems to be a lot of people, but it's not a lot with the decrease in our regular staff. People are leaving regularly, any organization, and 38 is just to replace those who left normally, and it also has increased our RT capacity. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to add anything to my answer?
No, merci.
No, thank you. That was a complete answer, and I have nothing to add. Okay. Do you have any kind of trouble recruiting any new auditors in general? Well, I don't think it's really a secret if you're in the auditing part of the auditing world. All the auditors are in high demand. That's really something that's happening across the board. So yes, we are having trouble, but I don't think any more trouble than anybody else. We did have trouble before the pandemic, and I anticipate that it will be even harder for all organizations to try to hire auditors during the current situation. I know that our committee...
Go to Monsieur Bosselou Duval. You have 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question for the Auditor General. Well, actually, first of all, congratulations on your appointment. This is very positive and very good. I have worked as an auditor, and it's the dream of so many accountants to become the Auditor General of a country such as ours. My question for you is that last week we heard that the Siemens, I believe, was able to hire the former CEO of Via Rail while Bombardier was part of the race. There were contracts worth more than $1 billion that were fought over. But in that context, hiring the former CEO of a company at the company that the corporation that got a great contract, well, there are questions about the circumstances surrounding that hiring. Was your office able to look into that? Well, we don't look at the hiring criteria or processes for these corporations. Recently, I went through a process that I found quite rigorous. I imagine that that's how it works across the world. Well, it's not really the hiring process that I was questioning. It's more the contract that was awarded, and I think that's more in line with your work. Well, looking at how contracts are awarded is something we do from time to time. I can only take your interest in this issue as a potential topic for future audits. So thank you. Thank you. That was my main question. I don't know if, do I still have time, Mr. Chair? Otherwise, I'll give my time to Ms. Vignola.
Have lots of time. You've got about 3.5 minutes.
Well, in that case, Auditor General, I may have another question for you. As the Auditor General, you said that you were going to look at the expenses related to COVID-19, but will there be anything looking at how contracts have been awarded? Because we know that sometimes when it's an emergency, things have to get done quickly, and in some cases, some companies have exclusive contracts or some contracts for supplies at a higher price than they should have been at, and sometimes some may have tried to get more out of the situation. Well, I do expect to be looking at the work done around COVID-19, looking at the awarding of significant contracts to ensure that the policies and procedure that the government has in place at the moment have been followed. Yes, there are always exceptions. And during a pandemic where decisions had to be made quickly, as you stated, I anticipate that some mistakes may have been made. We would expect to see a mechanism in place to identify those mistakes, and that necessary action will be taken to correct those mistakes. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I have how much time left?
1 minute, 30 seconds.
1 minute. Okay, 1 minute 30.
All right, 1 minute, 30 seconds. Okay. Well, regarding recruitment, you said you need more resources. What kind of response have you gotten from the part of the government? Has it been open to your suggestions? We are very interested in this. That is that you are able to carry out your work under proper conditions. And I think it's very important for society and for the government itself. Well, once my appointment is official and that the process is completed, it will be one of my priorities to continue the discussions with the government to ensure that we have access to the funding we need to properly fulfill our mandate. I will also be holding discussions. Well, we do need temporary funding at this time over the next few years, but we also want to look for a mechanism with a more long-term objective funding mechanism for funding that would be predictable. It would need to be an independent mechanism as well. So I will start and continue those discussions as quickly as possible. Thank you. And you can count on us to ensure that you'll have enough funding.
Thank you very much. Before we go to Mr. Green, colleagues, I'll just remind you, I didn't have a chance to mention this at the start of the meeting, but we will have to adjourn sharply at 1 p.m. to allow our technicians enough time to get ready for the next Zoom meeting. But we'll now go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, is it likely like we're going to have a second round? Does that look like it's still in the works?
Yes, we should have a second round.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several organizations...
Mr. Green, I must add that we may have a second round. I'm not sure if we'll have a third round. So this may be your last opportunity. I don't want to guarantee that you will not have another round, but just keep that in mind.
I will do that. Thank you. Several organizations such as Canadians for Tax Fairness and Transparency International have called on the government to take additional steps to strengthen accountability and transparency, such as publishing details on what specific businesses and organizations receive in different forms of federal support and for what purposes during the emergency and recovery phases. They also go on to state that they want publishing details on COVID-19 procurement and other contracts during the emergency and recovery periods, building on a good practices learned from the open contracting data standard, as other countries have done. They're calling for the strengthening of whistleblower protections for workers in the public, parapublic, and private sectors, following recently issued recommendations by the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations to ensure that employees in the public and private sectors have the freedom and protection to publicly warn about public health, misuse of public funds, and other concerns. The last point that they raise is increasing resources for monitoring, auditing, evaluation, enforcement, and prosecution, including additional funding for oversight agencies like the Auditor General, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Treasury Board, and for auditors and financial controllers in affected departments. Can you comment on the importance of implementing these measures to ensure that public money is being spent and tracked in a transparent and accountable manner?
So the role of the Office of the Auditor General is to help support Parliament in holding the government to account. We provide an independent, objective, credible source of information in order for Parliament to be able to do that. So clearly any measures that would increase or add to transparency and oversight and accountability are ones that our office would applaud and are part of on a daily basis. So adequate funding is one that is unfortunately causing some constraints for us right now. If we had proper funding, we'd be able to carry out our mandate to the degree we would really like to and believe that we should be doing. And so, as I mentioned, in addition to turning my attention once my nomination is done to investing in Canada and COVID-19, I will also be looking at continuing the dialogue that was started by my predecessors to secure sufficient funding for our organization.
How will your office incorporate gender-based analysis plus, including race-based data, into your analysis, into its assessments?
So we always consider aspects of sustainable development goals, which gender-based initiatives are part of them in every audit that we do. We believe that it's important to support the position of the government to focus on all the 17 sustainable development goals. And so we have already modified the way we approach work, and we continue to keep that at the forefront of any work that we do.
I would suggest that there may be some differences there. There may be some gaps that we might have to explore in a further meeting. Mr. Chair, at this point, I'd like to put my motion, given that I may not have another round.
Please go ahead.
That in the context of its study of the government's response to COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 1A, the committee send for all briefing notes, memos, and emails from senior officials prepared by the Minister of Health, the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Chief Medical Health Officer of Canada, and the Minister for Public Service and Procurement between 2010 and the present day regarding the stockpiling, management, disposal, and replenishment of medical supplies and in the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, that the committee receive this information no later than May 25th, that the matters of cabinet confidence and national security be excluded from the request, and that any redactions to protect the privacy of Canadian citizens and permanent residents whose names and personal information may be included in these documents, as well as public servants who have been providing assistance on this matter, be made by the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel of the House of Commons.
Thank you very much. That motion is in order. Colleagues, if you wish to participate in the debate or the discussion, you please raise your hand virtually. We'll see if we can get a speaking list that Paul will coordinate. A couple of things. Number one, Mr. Green, I believe the date you had indicated should be June 29th. I'm not sure if you...
So, Mr. Chair, you'll find, I think if you seek it, that I've had conversations with members. I didn't want to change the notice of motion that I had put. I don't know if that was possible to do. So that would, that the June 25th would be the interim report. But I think there may be some amendments that may come to address some of these aged out dates.
Mr. Chair, if I may intervene, the motion
Certainly.
The motion that Mr. Green gave notice of earlier this week contained the June 29th date in it. So it would be in order if you wanted to move it. I beg your pardon. The motion that Mr. Green gave notice of earlier this week, which was distributed to members, contained the June 29th date. It would be in order for him to move that motion with the correct date.
Thank you very much. Please strike May 25th to June 25th. It's been that kind of week here. I'm sure everybody can appreciate.
Well, it's been that kind of day for me too, Mr. Green. So I have some empathy for you. colleagues, if you wish to join this discussion or debate, again, please raise your hands and we will have a bit of a speakers list established. We have now the first two that I see, Monsieur Drouin, followed by Madame Vignola, followed by Mrs. Block. Mrs. Drouin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We want to say that we agree in general with the motion. The only amendment, if I can propose a friendly amendment, is the June 29th date. I would seek to my colleague whether or not we could agree to come to an August 30th date, and simple reason is to allow the departments to go seek that information, but also to allow enough time for translation. We know already in our committee that from the report to the end of the report is already almost a 3-week process, and I know that the information that we're seeking is going to be a lot thicker in terms of what will be provided to this committee. So we would propose an August 30th, 2020 deadline.
Happy to support that.
Thank you. We'll now go to Madame Vignola.
Je vais faire sensiblement la même.
My comment is about the same. I agree with the motion as a whole. 10 years of research, that's a lot. So we have to be reasonable to allow research and translation. So I agree with Mr. Drouin's amendment.
Mrs. Block, we have an amendment. Mr. Drouin has proposed August 30th. So we're now debating the amended motion, one that I believe Mr. Green has indicated he would be amenable to. But Mrs. Block, we will now go to you on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And given Mr. Green's acceptance of what I assume he views as a friendly amendment, we were prepared to support his motion as put forward to the committee. And so we would support this amendment. I would note that ATIP requests appear to be delayed by departments. So I believe this vehicle is really all that MPs have left in terms of seeking this kind of information. So we definitely support it.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. McCauley on the amendment, please.
Sorry, I lowered my hand. I'm fine. Thank you.
All right. Paul, I have not seen any other hands raised unless you have some that I have missed.
I have not, Mr. Chair. In order to take the decision on the amended motion, it has to be by recorded division. Shall I call the roll?
Yes, please.
The motion, so the question is on the motion with the amended version of the motion, including August 30th rather than June 29th as the date. I will call the roll now. Mr. Droy.
Yes.
Mr. Joe Howery.
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon.
Oui.
Yes.
Weiler.
Yes.
Mr. Abultiev.
Yes.
Ms. Block.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Madame Vignola.
Oui.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Green, was that in the affirmative? I'm
Oh,
sorry, I didn't hear.
absolutely, yes. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
That, Mr. Chair, is 10 in favor, none against.
Thank you very much, colleagues. That motion passes. And Mr. Green, I did not dock you any time when you started your motion, so you still have approximately 1 minute left.
Just out of respect, I'll happily forego the rest of my time and allow my colleagues.
I'm sorry, I have no audio coming across, Mr. Green.
Just out of courtesy for the rest of my members here on the committee, I'm happy to forego the rest of my time and allow the time to be recovered by them.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to our second round, which will be 5 minutes each. Paul, who do we have as our first speaker?
That would be Mr. Abultiev.
Mr. Abultiev, you have 5 minutes, please.
Yes. Good morning, Mrs. Hogan, and thank you for joining us today. And congratulations on your appointment as the Auditor General. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic have left a dire situation and massive challenges for federal and provincial governments. So spending on just two programs, as of the report we've received this morning, on SERP and the CWS, was over $110 billion. And there's a lot of the spending still questions the need to be answered, including the SERP in specific, the SERP's lack of eligibility verification before the funds get sent out. So the question is, will the AG office be looking into programs such as SERP for cost overruns, fraudulent accounts, and accountability?
So anytime we approach an audit, obviously we look at the risk that fraud may have occurred or that there's a risk that fraud could occur in a program. And that will obviously cause us to either scrutinize a program differently or in more depth. So as we do decide where to scope, and as you mentioned, those two programs are programs that are very significant and have had a big impact on Canadians and will likely be items that we will spend some time looking at. So when we do recognize that as decisions were made quickly in order to react to the pandemic and in order to support Canadians, that errors might occur. And when those errors occur, we would expect that an organization would be able to have a mechanism in place to identify those, and then that they also have processes and procedures and mechanisms in place in order to address, correct those errors, and if needed, recoup any funds that were paid in error.
So the answer is yes.
Short and sweet. If we do look at that program, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the current funding of the AG office, I mean, the funding could challenge the and interfere in your responsibility to overseeing those dramatic increases in spending. So how much does your office need a fund to be able to accomplish a review on the government response to COVID-19 and its usual mandate?
Being able to put a number to it is something that I right now am not able to do. We have had a budget request that was submitted in the past looking for funding. I have begun preliminarily to look at that so that we can see whether we could update it, whether it needs updating, and what adequate funding might be going forward. Obviously, diverting a significant amount of our auditors to the two large audits of investing in Canada and COVID-19, it's going to take a sizable amount of our workforce. We still have some auditors who are doing performance work that's ongoing, but a good chunk of our auditors are going to be looking at these two audits. And so if we do want to increase our capacity, then we do need to get more funding. And so I don't have the exact number, but I'm definitely looking at it.
Just to be specific, if we're to look at the percentage of increase that you wish to have, given the fact also that with the the way we communicate these days with social distancing and so forth, that also may bring a toll on your budget in general and your effectiveness to do the audit the proper and the most normal way. On a percentage base, how much of an increase you think you would need a fund to be able to operate properly, given the fact with the new reality that we're facing?
Again, any number I might give you would probably be a shot in the dark. I think when we talk about the new reality that we're going through, it has it impacts a percentage, or it impacts the funding in two ways. One, I see an increase given the fact that we do anticipate certain delays and difficulties in connecting with the departments that we audit and in individuals gaining access to the information that we might need. But I also see an opportunity for us to find ways to be perhaps a little more effective and a little more efficient. It is such early days, and so I think everyone's still trying to adapt and figure that out. So it would be hard to put a percentage out there, but we need to look at both sides of the coin before we know exactly what might be the right level.
Well, thank you. There's also many questions remain to be answered on the timing and effectiveness of the government response to the COVID-19, especially with dealing with recommendations on using personal protective equipment and measures to prevent the COVID-19 and the virus coming into Canada. The question is, will your office be looking into investigating the effectiveness of the government of Canada on pandemic measures?
And Madam Hogan, we're completely out of time, so I would ask that if you could provide that answer to Mr. Butev's question in writing to our clerk as soon as possible. I would appreciate that. We'll now go to Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes, please. Mr. McKinnon.
D'accord.
Great, thanks. We all make the same mistakes, Mr. Chair. Hello, Mrs. Hogan. Thank you for being there with your staff. Congratulations, by the way, on your nomination. I see that the initial motion of the House of Commons, which suspended our regular sittings, had an impact on you in relation to the audits. How did you perceive this motion from the House? How does that impact the Auditor General's office? Thank you. Yes, a motion was approved by the House of Commons, and it gave us the power to look at all the COVID-19 measures, be it new investment in the market, be it awarded contracts. It's linked to the health and security, and we have to audit other specific measures. It's pretty wide as a mandate, and it's up to us, in fact, to see how wide the response is and where could we have a better impact and a better added value for government and Canadians. So in your opinion, where to start and when to start this audit work? We're talking about many programs with different purposes. So how do you start this audit work, and when will you start these audits? Can you explain to us the processes you'll be following? As you said earlier, where do we start? That is the question we're asking ourselves when we talk about COVID-19. There's an incredible number of topics that we could look at. So we have to establish priorities and criteria to see where we can have a greater impact. So to help or have an impact that would lead to a change if ever there was a second wave of this pandemic. So we're revisiting our methodology, our audit methodology, and even reporting is looked at. We want to proceed more rapidly so parliamentarians and the government can have the results of these audits as soon as possible rather than later. So you do admit or you realize that timing is crucial in order to see if such a program was successful. Are you looking at other facts? What do I mean by that? For example, if such a program wouldn't exist, what would be the impacts or what would be the consequences? For example, if we didn't have an emergency benefit, do you look at the counter proposal, if you wish, if we didn't have these programs? Well, you're talking about government decisions. Well, this is not part of our mandate. Naturally, we'll try and find out if the objective, the target, has been met for a given benefit. Was the impact the one that was planned for? So following that, we would see that something was missing. But when we decide to audit a program, we look at the overall objective and did you meet this objective in an efficient way? So what about the context when you plan an audit? Do you take into account the emergency situation? Usually, when you have a huge program, it takes several years to plan, and we can debate about it. In this case, we're talking about emergency programs. So do you take into account this emergency context, the emergency measures?
But I would encourage you to give a written response to Mr. McKinnon's question. And if you can submit that written response to our clerk as quickly as possible, I would appreciate that. We'll now go to Mr. McCauley for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. And again, like everyone else, congratulations on your appointment. Now, a question regarding unfunded pension liabilities. Do you support the move to a bond yield-based calculation of the liabilities of unfunded plans of the public service pensions?
So pension accounting is a very interesting and complex area. I'm not sure. I think only accountants probably get excited about pension accounting, and perhaps actuaries.
Believe it or not, I get excited by how I think we're doing, how we're recording our unfunded liabilities.
So as you then appreciate, accounting for a pension liability includes so many different factors, so many assumptions and inputs.
I've had a long disagreement how we measure our discount rates, though, and I'm just wondering, do you support a move to a bond yield-based calculation of the liabilities?
So I was very much involved in the changes that were made several years ago, and in fact, there had been changes that I had pushed for over several years, and I believe that any time a change is made that results in a better valuation, that allows for better comparability.
Do you support the move to a bond yield-based calculation?
I support the move that the government has made now because I believe it does result in a much better measure of a very long-term liability.
Right. And based on the same logic, should that apply then to the identical liabilities of the funded plans?
Oh, so there's a big debate that I believe is going on in the accounting standard setting world right now.
Right, and the reason I brought this up, unfortunately, your predecessor, Mr. Ferguson, had committed to following what PSAB had come out with. Unfortunately, they've delayed their announcement, I guess, or delayed their report. So it kind of leaves things in the air. So I'm wondering, would you apply the same logic then to the funded plans for the discount rates?
There's merits in both sides. Right now, applying what public sector accounting standards has set out as acceptable ways to measure funded and unfunded pension plans, it is, in my opinion, the best way to go. Standards have been set by an independent body. They encourage comparability and transparency, and so the standard setters, I hope, will revive that work, that task force at some point, given that pensions are very important to so many layers of government.
Okay. Why do you believe the finance department has not properly funded your office?
I unfortunately don't know what's motivated decisions that they have made in the past. I do know that I will continue to ensure that we have adequate funding, and in the short term, and in the long term will completely push for this independent mechanism that I think will allow us to have more predictable, stable funding,
Okay.
that I also see a desire to have Parliament involved in.
Great. Now, long question. 2018 public health planning document says Canada, this is our Government of Canada our rules, regulations saying Canada should not rely on the WHO crisis levels to make national health decisions. Auditor General 2008 report says Canada should have a comprehensive and well-documented internal process for surveillance and data systems of pandemic type issues. Now, COVID-19 pandemic responses have relied on the WHO pandemic phases to launch Canadian responses. Now, I noted in a couple meetings ago that capital spending for PHAC's health security core responsibility, as noted in the public accounts, the spending has dropped significantly over the last 4 years. Do you think such a drop in funding to PHAC has played a role in our ability to run our own surveillance rather than relying on third parties such as the WHO, or WHO rather?
So, I mean, any comment I might have might be personal at this point and really wouldn't be based on much factual evidence. And so it goes really against the grains of who I am, in that I would prefer to reserve comment once I've been able to look at the government's response and preparedness for this. I do believe that as Auditor General of Canada, you have to make sure that your findings are fact-based and independent, and so at this time I really could not comment on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go now to Mr. Kuzmierczuk for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations, Ms. Hogan, on your excellent appointment, and I wish you well in your tenure. During this period of COVID, many of us have adopted new ways of communicating with constituents, new ways of communicating with each other, new technologies, new methods. I just wanted to ask you how you envision us modernizing the way the Auditor General's Office communicates reports and communicates information with Canadians. Where do you see sort of the potential moving forward so that they can access the information and maybe understand it and engage with it in a more modern way?
Well, thank you so much for that question. It's definitely one of the things that I've been turning my mind to a great deal, and one of the ways I believe that our office can absolutely modernize how it works and how it reports. Historically, we've had a very long-form technical audit report that makes sense for the subject matter experts, and there is always a need for something like that. But as you've said, the reliance on IT, on social media is completely changing. New generations are digesting information in very different ways. And one of the challenges I'd like to put to our internal folks who do communications and reporting is how best can we modify or offer different opportunities, different reports that are easily digestible in different mediums. So whether there be videos, whether it be pictographs, whether it be, I don't know, the list goes on, and I'm definitely not an expert in communication. And so I do think that it is an opportunity where our reports could then be used by so many more people and be much more far-reaching than they are now. Obviously, asking parliamentarians how you'd like to digest information and what would work better for you is something that we'd have to consider as we look at how we modify our reporting mechanism.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that connecting with the next generation is also absolutely important, and connecting with young people as well too. And the work of the Auditor General is important. Will we see the AG's work on Instagram anytime soon?
I'm sure someone in our office is screaming. I don't know what they would tell me if it's yes or no, but I'll look into that. How's that sound?
Great. No, that's terrific. I do have another question, which is, I know the work of the Auditor General, you have to work obviously very closely with many departments and ministries, and you try to balance sort of the pressures that you put on and the additional workload that your work puts on the ministries and different departments. How do you balance that the need to get information from ministries and departments and staff, and yet respect the fact that they also have already a quite busy workload that they are dealing with as well. So how do you balance those two demands?
It's honestly a little bit of an art. I've in my previous work history had the opportunity to sit on both sides of that audit relationship, and so I can appreciate the pros and the cons of being audited as well as being the auditor. In my humble opinion, it starts with an excellent collaborative relationship with the people that you audit, and that's something that we need to make sure that we spend time developing and focusing on, and then coming to a mutual agreement on timelines, on criteria, on how best to deal with each other's peaks and valleys of work. So it is really working together with entities and working together with Parliament about the timing of when we might be able to provide information. There's a lot of factors to consider, and it is a bit of a dance or an art to get it all right. And we don't always do it, but the matter is to learn from those lessons and to improve the next time around.
Mm. And just a question, do you receive feedback as well too from the ministries and the staff that you work with as well? Does the Auditor General receive feedback in terms of that collaborative sort of those collaborative efforts from ministries and departments?
We absolutely do.
Very brief answer, if you could, Madam Hogan. Very brief answer.
I will. Following every audit, we do have post-audit surveys, and we solicit feedback. We solicit feedback throughout the audit, but we do it in a very formal fashion at the end of every single audit that we do.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to our final 2.5-minute intervention, starting with Monsieur Bassarou-Duval. Monsieur Bassarou-Duval?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Madam Auditor General, I might have a supplementary question for you. I understand that you're saying that resources and cooperation is a challenge for all departments, but I was an auditor. I've seen some businesses who did not understand or did not think it was important to have an auditor and audits. So what are you doing concretely to ensure that you get answers? Because you have to do your work and the answers must be provided. Yes, indeed. One of the roles of our office and of our officers in our office is to educate, to raise the awareness of people throughout the government of the role of the auditor, an independent auditor that doesn't come to try to find your weaknesses, but somebody who can be your partner, your ally to improve your programs and your results. So it depends on establishing a good discussion. You have to push, yes, you have to get the information, you have to have access to the civil servants that we need to do our work. And in the past, we've had some challenges, but we were always able to resolve those issues. So I trust in everybody who works in our office, in all civil servants everywhere, because we all have the same goal to add value to Canada. Are there departments where it's harder than others for certain services where cooperation is harder? Oh, I think we could say yes. In any organization, in any field of work, there's always places where it's harder. Sometimes there are real reasons. We have to take into consideration the context in which people were reacting, but it's obvious that it's for everybody, that there's always challenges everywhere.
Thank you very much. We'll go to our final intervention to Mr. Green.
Thank you. Yesterday, the Canadian press reported that the president of the Treasury Board has sent a letter to all ministers stressing the importance of documenting government decision-making, managing sensitive files securely, and making best efforts to answer requests under the Access to Information Act. Former Auditor General Michael Ferguson would often stress the importance of data collection, collecting the right data, and using the data collected effectively. Considering the speed at which departments are taking action and the significant amounts of money being spent, are you concerned with there being a lack of data and information and the correct date available for you to conduct thorough audits?
So I am very much aware of the letter that you're talking about that the Secretary of the Treasury Board sent to all departments. And yes, we have commented often on data and data quality, which I imagine will continue to comment on, ensuring that decisions are properly documented and the rationale for them is extremely important. Having comprehensive and honest information to give to decision makers is essential, and data quality is the foundation of that. So, am I concerned? Well, I recognize that in the context that we're in, that decisions were made quickly, and that people may not have been able to follow the processes or do it the way they'd like to. But
the question remains is my apologies. The question remains is why weren't these policies and practices already put in place? Like, does this not raise a red flag that perhaps this wasn't already part of their effective mandate?
So, to my understanding, there is policies and practices about documenting decisions and judgment calls that are made. The letter was, recognizing that, in my opinion, recognizing that individuals are making decisions quickly and just reminding them that those key accountability mechanisms are still important, even though we're in very different and uncertain times.
Thank you. That's all I need, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Madame Hogan, I will excuse you now. Thank you for your appearance. Once again, my personal congratulations for your nominations. I wish you nothing but the best of luck in your next decade of work on behalf of the citizens of Canada. Colleagues, I noticed that, was it Madame May, did you have your hand raised?
Mr. Chair, if there was a chance to ask Madam Hogan a very quick question, but it sounds like there's not.
Unfortunately, we're completely out of time because we have to adjourn at 1 p.m. sharp, and that is now. So once again, colleagues, thank you for your participation. We'll see you all again, I'm sure, on Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We are adjourned.
you.